She was just the janitor, or so everyone thought. For years, she swept floors and emptied trash while executives walked by without a glance. But when the CEO overheard her guiding a lost client, in perfect Mandarin, everything stopped. Then she switched to Spanish. Then French. What happened next didn't just shock the office. It changed one woman's life forever. For over a decade, Elena Reyes moved through the hallways of Halverson and Company long after the last light in the executive offices went dark. With a cart full of cleaning supplies and headphones tucked under her hoodie, she scrubbed glass walls, wiped down marble countertops, and vacuumed endless carpets that muffled the sound of her presence. To the day staff, Elena was just part of the background, reliable, invisible, and silent. She arrived every evening at 7 p.m. sharp, slipping in through the back service elevator. While most employees headed home to their families, she prepared herself for another night of solitary labor. She worked with quiet diligence, moving from floor to floor, her work impeccable and unnoticed. Every surface she touched gleamed by morning. But the people who walked past those polished floors rarely thought about the hands behind the shine. They knew her name only because it was stitched into the uniform she wore. Elena. No last name. No history. No identity beyond the janitor who always seemed to be there but never spoke much. She was polite, always nodding or offering a soft "good evening" when someone stayed late, but never engaged in conversation. People assumed she didn't speak much English. Some assumed she didn't speak at all. But Elena had once spoken many languages, in rooms filled with ambition and promise. She had studied literature and linguistics at a university thousands of miles away, where she debated philosophy in French and wrote essays in Mandarin. Back then, her dreams had stretched across continents. She had imagined herself working for international organizations, bridging cultures, translating the world into understanding. That version of her lived far away now, buried beneath years of survival, immigration papers, and sacrifice. When she arrived in the United States, life didn't unfold as planned. A promised job at a cultural institute dissolved overnight. Her qualifications, though real, were dismissed as irrelevant. Bills stacked up quickly, and opportunities faded just as fast. With no safety net and a young daughter to care for, Elena did what she had to do. She cleaned offices. First as a temp, then as part of the contracted night staff. The job paid just enough to cover rent and groceries, and it didn't require fluent English. She told herself it was temporary. She would go back to her dreams soon. But 1 year became 2, then 5, then 10. Somewhere along the way, people stopped seeing her as someone with potential and started seeing her only as a cleaning lady. The way they spoke around her, if they spoke at all, carried that subtle condescension that comes from assumed superiority. They spoke over her, never to her. They tossed casual phrases in Spanish thinking she'd be impressed, even though it was her third language, not her first. They never wondered what stories she held. Still, Elena never allowed bitterness to take root. She found dignity in her work. She took pride in leaving spaces better than she found them. And when no one was watching, she kept her mind sharp. She listened to podcasts in German, watched lectures in Japanese, and read novels in Italian. Her mind remained a library, rich and alive, even if no one else ever borrowed a book. To her daughter, Sophia, she was more than a janitor. She was a genius. Every night before school, Elena helped her with homework in multiple languages, drilled her on vocabulary, and shared cultural stories from all over the world. Elena couldn't give Sophia everything she wanted, but she gave her knowledge, curiosity, and the unwavering belief that identity is not defined by uniforms or job titles. At the office, however, that deeper truth about Elena remained locked behind closed perceptions. Executives passed her without acknowledgement, not out of malice, but indifference. The same hands that cleaned their coffee spills and straightened their chairs went unnoticed. They never imagined that Elena could translate complex documents, understand legal briefings in 4 languages, or hold a conversation about global economics. To them, she was part of the night, a presence that quietly made everything tidy by morning. It wasn't that Elena was hiding her brilliance. She simply had no space to show it. The workplace operated on assumptions, and no one ever asked. Over time, she grew used to being unseen. But deep inside, a quiet ember still glowed. She knew that one moment, just one, could change everything. Someone just had to look past the uniform, past the accent, past the surface. That moment was coming. And when it did, the entire building would find out who Elena Reyes really was. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that passed without ceremony. Employees buzzed in and out of meetings, clutched coffee cups, and stared into screens, focused on deadlines and deliverables. The hum of business as usual filled the halls of Halverson and Company, a quiet rhythm of routine. But beneath that rhythm, something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that would ripple through the entire company by noon. A visitor had arrived unexpectedly, a potential investor from Beijing who had taken a wrong turn while trying to find the executive conference room. Confused and visibly frustrated, he wandered into one of the upper floors where early employees were still trickling in. He spoke no English, and the building receptionist had already left her desk to grab a delivery downstairs. Most of the staff who passed by either didn't notice the man or assumed someone else would help. One junior analyst gave him a polite smile and hurried past, unsure how to assist. Elena was finishing her shift, quietly wiping down the glass walls in the corridor when she noticed the man looking increasingly anxious. She watched him glance at his phone, then at the hallway signs, none of which offered any real guidance. Without hesitation, she approached, her cart parked by the wall. With a warm tone, she addressed him, in perfect, fluent Mandarin. The man's face shifted instantly from confusion to relief. He responded, surprised and grateful, and Elena calmly explained where he needed to go, even offering to walk him part of the way. As they spoke, a passing executive assistant slowed down, her ears catching the unusual exchange. By the time Elena was pointing toward the elevator and giving detailed directions, another employee from the legal team had also stopped nearby, pretending to scroll on his phone while eavesdropping. Moments later, another colleague walking toward the elevator overheard Elena speaking Spanish, this time to a member of the janitorial team who had just clocked in. Their exchange was rapid, casual, and confident. As if switching channels, she pivoted seamlessly into a French greeting directed at one of the marketing managers who often traveled to the firm's Paris branch. The marketing manager blinked, taken aback, and responded in kind. Elena smiled, replied with ease, and returned to wiping down the railing as if nothing had happened. Within 10 minutes, word had spread like static electricity through the office. People began whispering in hallways, exchanging glances, refreshing their Slack channels. "Did you hear the janitor speaking Mandarin?" "No, I heard her in French." She just explained the entire building layout to Mr. Zhao like a professional interpreter. The buzz grew louder with each retelling, each person layering their own astonishment onto the story. The incident caught the attention of Rachel Liu, the company's chief of international strategy, who had been trying to arrange a translator for an upcoming investor tour. She made a note to look into the janitor everyone was suddenly talking about. But it wasn't just the multilingual fluency that had people stunned, it was how naturally she shifted between languages, how confident and articulate she was in each one. This wasn't someone who had picked up phrases here and there. This was someone highly educated, deeply trained, and completely overlooked. Then came the moment that changed everything. The CEO, Daniel Halverson himself, was walking past the executive floor when one of his senior aides mentioned the language incident in passing. At first, he thought it was just office gossip, something blown out of proportion. But curiosity got the better of him. When he finally reached the floor and saw Elena finishing her duties, still moving with her usual quiet grace, he asked a simple question, just to test the waters. In fluent French, he greeted her and asked if she had been the one helping the visitor earlier. Without hesitation, Elena answered. Not only did she confirm in flawless French, but she continued the conversation, referencing the exact room the guest needed, the meeting schedule, and even the name of the guest's assistant, which she'd picked up from his phone call. Halverson didn't speak French well enough to follow every word, but the confidence in her tone, the speed of her reply, and the expressions of stunned employees nearby told him everything he needed to know. Silence followed her last sentence. Not because anything had gone wrong, but because an invisible barrier had just shattered in front of everyone. The CEO looked at Elena not as the janitor who passed through unseen, but as a mystery that no one had bothered to solve until now. By the time she returned to the storage room to put away her supplies, half the floor was still in quiet shock. Slack messages pinged with speculation. A handful of employees stared at the elevator doors long after she'd left. People who had worked in the same building as Elena for years suddenly realized they didn't know her at all. What happened that morning wasn't just a moment of surprise. It was the first crack in a long-held assumption. The first time someone from the top had really seen her. The office wouldn't be the same again. The news reached the executive offices before the end of the day. What began as hushed hallway gossip had become the dominant conversation across every department. Managers compared stories, assistants swapped messages, and HR fielded more than a dozen inquiries about Elena. People couldn't stop talking about the janitor who spoke multiple languages with more fluency than anyone on the international team. It wasn't just surprising, it was humbling. By mid-morning the next day, Daniel Halverson had already asked for a discreet background check. What it revealed stunned even him. Elena Reyes had once been a highly regarded linguistic scholar in her home country. She held dual degrees in language studies and international relations. Before moving to the U.S., she had worked as a junior interpreter at a diplomatic office, handling high-stakes translations and cultural exchanges. She had even been published in a respected academic journal, years before her immigration. Yet for over a decade, none of that had surfaced, not in any conversation, not in any resume, and certainly not in the job records tied to her custodial contract. The CEO reviewed her employment history at Halverson and Company. She had never called in sick, never missed a shift, and never filed a complaint. There were no disciplinary actions. No notes from supervisors, just consistently marked checklists and brief acknowledgments that her work was satisfactory. She had cleaned the offices of vice presidents, senior counsel, and marketing directors who had never once spoken to her beyond a passing nod. It was clear to Daniel that Elena's talents had not only been wasted, they had been completely ignored. And the fault lay with the company culture he had helped shape. The realization hit harder than expected. The firm prided itself on innovation, global outreach, and leadership development, yet a woman with the capacity to serve as a multilingual strategist had been pushing a mop in silence for 10 years. Not because she lacked ability, but because no one ever asked who she really was. Daniel called an urgent meeting with HR, legal, and international strategy. What started as a conversation about Elena quickly turned into a broader evaluation of how the company identified talent. Questions were raised about internal mobility, class bias, and the invisibility of contract workers. The deeper they looked, the more uncomfortable truths emerged. Elena was not the only one who had been overlooked. She was simply the first to be noticed. Within days, the CEO made a decision that startled even his closest advisors. Elena would be offered a new full-time position as a multilingual cultural liaison, reporting directly to the International Strategy Division. Her responsibilities would include supporting global clients, translating high-level communications, and training staff on cross-cultural communication. She would receive a salary more than triple her current earnings, full benefits, and a professional development stipend to resume any certification she wanted. But the move wasn't just about promotion, it was about recognition. Daniel personally wrote the internal announcement, detailing her background, her quiet excellence, and the oversight that had kept her hidden in plain sight. He didn't frame it as a heroic discovery. Instead, he acknowledged that the company had failed to see someone right in front of them, and that change was not only necessary, it was overdue. The announcement stunned the staff. Some responded with applause and excitement. Others with discomfort, realizing their own complicity in the quiet disregard. Departments buzzed with emotion, admiration, guilt, inspiration. Messages poured in from employees across all levels expressing support, regret, and in some cases, their own stories of talents left unnoticed due to job titles or assumptions. For Elena, the offer came with a mixture of shock and disbelief. After years of silence, someone had finally asked the right questions. Someone had looked past the uniform, past the shift hours, and had chosen to see her as more than a custodian. She accepted the offer with grace, but also with quiet courage. She knew that stepping into this new role meant stepping out of invisibility, and that would come with scrutiny. But she was ready. More than ready. Daniel Halverson's decision did more than uplift one woman. It sparked a reckoning within the company. Departments began reviewing internal practices. HR launched a formal initiative to identify hidden talent among support and contract staff. Leadership training was updated to include unconscious bias education. Mentorship programs expanded to include non-traditional roles. And perhaps most importantly, people started greeting the night staff by name. The CEO had not just promoted Elena, he had exposed the company's blind spots. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that brilliance doesn't always wear a suit or sit behind a desk. Sometimes, it pushes a cart down a hallway, waiting for the world to see it. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was unmistakable. What began as a single moment of recognition evolved into a company-wide shift in mindset. Halvorson and Company, once known for its polished image and high-level international deals, now carried a new reputation, one rooted in inclusion, awareness, and intentional leadership. The elevation of Elena Reyes had not been a public relations move, it had been a catalyst for a deeper reckoning. In the months that followed her promotion, internal systems began to change. The HR department launched a comprehensive internal mobility initiative, inviting contract and custodial staff to confidentially share additional skills, certifications, or education. Employees who had previously felt unseen were now submitting profiles that revealed a wealth of untapped knowledge: computer science degrees, financial certifications, engineering diplomas, and fluency in various languages. A team of recruiters was tasked with evaluating these profiles, not for token gestures, but for meaningful placement and development opportunities. Supervisors were required to attend training on class bias, cultural competency, and inclusive communication. New guidelines emphasized the importance of acknowledging the entire workforce, regardless of role. Leaders were encouraged to spend time shadowing non-executive departments to better understand the lives of those who kept the company running after hours or behind the scenes. As a result, small but powerful changes began to unfold. More eye contact, more conversations, more names remembered, and more voices heard. Elena's role itself became a cornerstone of the company's international growth. She was involved in critical client meetings, helped revise the onboarding process for foreign partners, and served as a consultant for cross-cultural business practices. Her ability to anticipate miscommunications and bridge cultural gaps gave Halvorson and Company a strategic edge in markets where it had previously struggled to gain traction. What others once dismissed as just language skills proved to be invaluable tools for business diplomacy, trust building, and global collaboration. Her presence at the executive table was more than symbolic. It forced a recalibration of what leadership looked like and who could embody it. The janitorial badge she once wore was no longer a mark of hierarchy but a powerful reminder of what the company had failed to see for too long. Elena didn't carry resentment, she carried purpose. She became a mentor, especially to first-generation immigrants and blue-collar staff, sharing her journey not as a miracle, but as proof of possibility. Other companies took notice. Industry peers reached out for insight into Halvorson and Company's evolving talent practices. Articles were written about the firm's unique approach to recognizing hidden potential. Business schools requested case studies. A former janitor's elevation had become a model for how organizations could uncover genius where they least expected it, not by luck, but through deliberate change. Internally, morale improved. Employee engagement scores rose. Retention among entry-level staff increased, especially in roles that had traditionally seen high turnover. People now believed there was a path forward, even from the most modest beginnings. Mentorship programs connected warehouse workers with data analysts, and night shift team members were invited to company events they had previously been excluded from. The change wasn't without discomfort. Some employees struggled to reconcile their old perceptions with the new culture. A few managers resisted the idea that talent could exist outside of polished resumes and prestigious backgrounds. But the overwhelming momentum leaned toward progress. The old culture of quiet elitism was being replaced by one of curiosity and humility. The company newsletter began featuring employee stories from every department. A security guard with a background in cybersecurity. A mailroom clerk who was also a published poet. A cafeteria worker with a culinary degree from abroad. These stories didn't just entertain, they shifted the collective perspective. People started seeing one another differently, listening more carefully, and asking better questions. Perhaps the most profound shift was in how the company defined success. No longer limited to financial metrics or high-profile deals, success now included the ability to recognize and elevate human potential. It included creating pathways for overlooked individuals to contribute at the highest levels. It included the courage to admit past blind spots and the discipline to correct them. Elena's journey wasn't framed as a fairy tale. It was framed as a wake-up call. A call that reminded everyone that brilliance can be found anywhere, that dignity and intelligence are not reserved for certain job titles, and that the true measure of a company lies in how it treats the people it doesn't have to impress. Years later, her story would still be told, not just as inspiration, but as policy. Her name became part of new hire orientation, her example used in leadership seminars, her presence a living reminder that transformation begins not with a program, but with a moment of recognition and the decision to act on it. At Halverson and Company, that decision had rewritten one woman's story, and in doing so, rewrote the company's future. They say talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. Elena Reyes didn't need a spotlight. She didn't ask for recognition. She simply showed up, night after night, doing work no one celebrated, until one moment changed everything. Her story is more than inspiring, it's a reminder. A reminder to look beyond job titles, to listen more closely, to ask, not assume, and to believe that brilliance can wear any uniform. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone to see them. If this story moved you, share it. You never know who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more real stories that restore faith in humanity.